North Korea late today launching a new missile, this time flying higher and longer than any missile that country has launched before.
한 곳에 갈 때마다 막 그 동네에 있는 여길 말하면 나이 든 아저씨 같은 분들이 이제 막 다 모여가지고 지금 듣고 보면 그게 이제 흥정이라고 해서 이제 가격을 얼마 할 거냐 달아나진 않냐.
Pleased to welcome the activist Hannah Song with us tonight. Hannah is the CEO of this remarkable organization, Liberty, in North Korea. Well, Hannah, tell us, what drew you to this, incredible work that you're doing that has, it's so grim and so dangerous for the people concerned?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first of all, thank you so much, Tina, just for the opportunity to be here and to talk about the North Korean people, a side of the narrative that I think we rarely get to hear about. For me personally, I oftentimes call myself an accidental activist. I never had an interest to become an activist or to necessarily do this work. I was very happy working in corporate America, but I read a book probably by accident, about a young man named Kang Cho-hwan, who was a North Korean boy at the age of 9. And his grandfather had been accused of betraying the government, and the result was a multi-generational punishment. His grandmother, his parents, and him, at the age of 9, were put into one of North Korea's most brutal political prison camps, where he was there for 10 years. So this book outlined his story, and I was just shocked. I think the two things that struck me the most were, how could a place like this exist today? And the second was, why is nobody talking about this? And so there's this great quote by St. Augustine of Hippo that I think really encapsulates sort of what drew me to this work. And he says, he says that hope has two beautiful daughters, anger and courage. Mm-hmm. Anger at the way things are, and courage to see to it that they do not remain that way. Mm-hmm.
Well, tell us about your grandmother, who was born and raised in North Korea, because that's another link, of course, to this work.
It is, and to be honest, my grandmother is from North Korea. She's from the capital, Pyongyang, but growing up, she never talked about her life at all, and so I wasn't actually interested in this work at all because of her story, because I didn't even know it. But a few years ago, after I had already been doing this work for quite some time, her health it was deteriorating, and she began to share stories with my mom that she had never heard before about my grandmother's life. And she talked about, right before the division of the Korean peninsula, she had left North Korea to go to Japan, but that she had actually left behind her husband and 2 children, and had never known that she would never be able to go back again because the peninsula would be divided. And so she went on to South Korea, where my mother was born. And as a result, with my mom immigrating to the US, I was born in the States. But, I think it's truly incredible that she has this whole other life that I had never known about. But
so heartbreaking.
It is.
So heartbreaking. So tell us, how does this network, this underground railroad, really, that you are running, how does it operate? How does it work? Tell us.
So the best way to explain it is really that it's a journey of secret rescue routes that we utilize, starting from the border of North Korea and China all the way to Southeast Asia. It's about a 3,000-mile journey. So just to give you some context, that's longer than the distance between New York and LA. It's a very long difficult and dangerous journey, but we utilize a network of partners, local people in each country that we're moving North Koreans through, with our own staff actually on the ground in Southeast Asia doing that final leg of the journey and helping to bring North Koreans to freedom and safety.
Now, they have to get out through China.
Correct.
But once they get to China, they're not safe, right? I mean, China is a very dangerous place for a North Korean defector to be.
That's right. I think a lot of people assume once you get out of North Korea, you've made it. But actually, getting out of North Korea is extremely dangerous and difficult in and of itself. In fact, to get out, you have to have some sort of network or pay a broker, sometimes $5,000 to $10,000 per person, even just to have someone safely get you across. Once you get into China, the Chinese government actually refuses to recognize North Koreans as refugees. And so because of that, they instead cooperate with the North Korean government. It's known that there are North Korean security agents operating, running around China, looking for these refugees, helping to find them, arresting them. And once China arrests them, they will forcibly send them back to North Korea, even though they know what will happen to them.
Well, what will happen to them when they get back?
We have heard from many North Koreans who have been caught and sent back who talk about the atrocious, horrific punishment that they receive if they are caught and sent back, especially if they are known that they were trying to defect and make it all the way to South Korea or the United States. So they are interrogated, tortured. They may end up in one of these prison camps. And so the conditions and the treatment is extremely horrific if they're caught and sent back.
Well, tell us about some of the people that you've managed to rescue.
You know, there's one couple that comes to mind that I love to share their story. We call them Grams and Gramps. They were probably one of the oldest couples, one of the oldest people that we were able to bring through our network. Grams and Gramps left. They made this dangerous journey in their late 70s. And, you know, this journey is extremely difficult. And you can imagine when you're traversing through this 3,000 miles on foot at times, through various forms of transportation, you can really only bring very little with you. And so it was extremely adorable because by the time they came to Southeast Asia, where our staff was, they said they were perpetually holding hands, were probably holding hands throughout the entire journey, had to abandon so many of their things along the way that by the time they got there, they were essentially sharing a pair of eyeglasses together. But we asked, we said, you know, Gramps, why did you decide to make this dangerous journey, at this point in your life after you had been hiding for so long in China? And he said that it was because he promised his wife that they would live their last few years together in freedom.
Oh, so it's so incredibly, it's just so sad, the whole thing. I mean, do any of them try to escape by boat into Japan? Because that's the only other way out, right, out of North Korea.
There have been a few other routes out historically before this sort of underground railroad was being utilized. They used to go into embassies and consulates, but it's become difficult to escape through there, even through Mongolia and the Gobi Desert, where many people had even died trying to do that. There's a unique case of a young man, actually, that we know that escaped by boat successfully, although it's extremely difficult to do. In fact, it's probably only about less than a dozen that make it out that way annually. He was in his early 20s, and he was just incredibly bright and smart and ambitious, but because of North Korea's class system, he knew that even despite his incredible potential, he would never be able to go anywhere within North Korean society. And so he decided that he wanted to try to make this dangerous escape out. He tried to go to the border of North Korea and China and realized it would be too difficult to make that journey out without having any connections or any money. So he came back, saved up his money, was listening illegally to foreign radio broadcasts to prepare for this journey. And then he managed to buy a maritime GPS off the black market, go to the West Coast, and was able to procure a boat, and then over a 2-day journey actually made his way down south to South Korea, but at one point actually hit really rough waters. And when he talked about the story, you could tell he has PTSD from that moment because he did not expect that he was going to make it. It was so choppy and dangerous. In fact, the water had gotten into his GPS. He said it broke. So that last part of the journey, he said he didn't think he was going to make it at all, but he just kept rowing and somehow ended up making it to an island, right, one of South Korea's islands.
Incredible courage. What do the defectors tell you about the life that they left behind in North Korea? I mean, we saw the horrendous state of that poor American student, Otto Warmbier, who came out of North Korea having simply taken down a poster. He was thrown into prison and he came back in a coma and he died. It was absolutely horrendous what happened to him. I mean, these prisons that they're in, how many of those are there? Is it a network of prisons, and why do you get arrested?
There is a network of these political prison camps. So they're very different from other prisons that exist, but these political prison camps, there's about 5 of them with an estimated about 120,000 North Korean citizens in there. These are for political crimes. These are crimes of conscience. These are things, if you have spoken out against the government, if you try to dissent against this government, you may end up in this camp, and you may end up with members of your family, just like that young man in the book I had read. The conditions are horrific, absolutely horrific. Starvation, torture, rape. These are common occurrences that are happening in these camps, and they've been compared to the Soviet gulags and the Nazi concentration camps. And so again, this is the reason why it is astonishing that this exists today.
Well, I want to share a satellite imaging which shows the very real darkness that North Koreans live under. Tell us what that picture means.
I think this picture is one of the most powerful pictures on North Korea. It's an actual satellite photo that was taken from the space station a few years ago. And what you notice is how bright the lights are right below and right above North Korea. Right below is South Korea, right above that is China. And what's incredible is actually, 50 years ago, China and South Korea would have all been dark as well. But what we've seen is that over the last few decades, both of those countries have opened up and have developed and have essentially released the potential of their people, you could say, the human potential. But instead, North Korea has chosen to completely stifle and cut off 25 million people from the outside world. And instead, they have enforced poverty on this population. And I think that's really one of the biggest tragedies of North Korea, is a country of 25 million people whose human potential has been absolutely stifled for decades.
What happens to them when they get to freedom? I mean, I can't imagine anything more strange than to have imagined the world was one way and then get to freedom and discover everything you'd been told was in fact the reverse.
Absolutely.
How do they do when they get out of there?
It's difficult. It's very difficult. And, we see, for example, younger people may tend to assimilate a bit quicker than older individuals that come out. But nonetheless, South Korea, where the vast majority of North Koreans choose to go, is such a fast-paced, technologically advanced society. One young North Korean man said that coming to South Korea was like getting in a time machine and fast-forwarding 50 years. They're catching up on technology. They're using computers and cell phones for the first time ever. They're learning proper history, not the way that they had been taught with the propaganda of the regime. They're having to catch up on learning basic things. There's this one story he shared about his mom when they went to this ATM. It was so advanced that in Korea it talks back to you and says, thank you for your transaction, have a nice day. And his mom looked at him and said, the woman in there must be so tired. She's speaking to people all day.
Wow.
So this notion of having to get so caught up on technology and just society and democracy and capitalism and all of these things.
Terrifying.
It's a lot.
Absolutely terrifying. Let's watch this clip of a woman who was held in one of North Korea's prisons, and she was released and she managed to defect. And she now lives and works in South Korea, and she has managed to adapt quite well. But let's just look at her for a minute.
말해라 안 말할 때 이렇게 탁 때려요. 그럼 그 고무줄이 진짜 아프거든요. 정말 진짜 이 살이 다 까맣게 될 정도예요. 오빠가 여기서 계속 나한테 노래 불러주고 그랬어요. 내가 힘들어하고 못 자고 그러니까 밤에 여기서 노래 불러주면 내가 그 노래 같이 따라 듣다가 이렇게 방으로 이렇게 배관 같은 게 이렇게 지나갔거든요. 거기다 대고 오빠랑 얘기를 막 하고 그렇게 했었는데 그러다가 들켜가지고 오빠가 엄청 매맞고 나 안 맞게 해주려고.
Well, just today, the Supreme Court ruled that a travel ban on people from 8 countries, including North Korea, can be enforced. What kind of impact is that going to have on your work for young women like that?
Fortunately, on this most recent travel ban, it's a bit of a red herring, so this particular ban won't actually affect refugees and asylum seekers, but the recent moratorium on refugees coming to the United States had an impact in terms of delaying that process for individuals who did want to come to America, and also deterred some who had wanted to come as well. And so,
And if you could talk to President Trump now about his policies towards North Korea, do you agree with the saber rattling? And what would you say to him now yourself? What would your message be to the president?
trying to think of the most diplomatic way to put
No,
this.
it's interesting.
No, you know, I think, to be honest, it's with the rhetoric that's come out, this is a cyclical thing, right? Even before this administration, North Korea, these provocations, it's a cycle of provocation and concessions and over, and we've seen this happening repeatedly. But the rhetoric has been so heightened at this point, and you know, what's so different this time around is that it's become so hyper-securitized, and it's become so dehumanizing. You know, any progress that we had made before is essentially we've regressed. And so, you know, what this has done is, unfortunately, we don't even see the North Koreans as people any longer. And I think one of the most important things to emphasize is that we need a broader approach. We need a more holistic understanding of North Korea, and it has to begin with the people, they themselves as humans, as people, and in fact, as agents of change. And one thing I think that this administration has an opportunity to do is to actually understand a lot of the changes that the North Korean people have been driving inside of that country over the last 20 years. There are a lot of different approaches that can be explored that are non-military, that are not being discussed, and that are not being considered. And I think that that is something that I think that is probably one of the most dangerous things and one of the dangerous places that we are at right now.
So, well, thank you, Hannah Song. Your work is incredibly courageous. You're helping these people get a new life, and I think we should all applaud you tonight for what you do.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.